You know, Resident Evil has always been a bit of a mixed bag over the years. Different styles, different moods, even going so far as to shift genres in the space of two games, making the transition from survival horror to full on action. Which is pretty understandable. After all, the franchise has been going for over 25 years now, and it's expanded beyond just video games, even making the crossover to two different series of movies, CGI and live action. Say what you will about the latter. Ugh. So it stands to reason that the series would have to evolve to keep the interest high. After 7 main numbered titles and a litany of spin-off games and non-numbered titles, I have to say that I really don't envy the demands on the game developers to try and come up with something fresh to bring in new generations of gamers to the franchise, whilst keeping the original fans of the established canon satisfied. Expanding on canon is a tall order and no small feat, and it can work if it's done right. And so this brings us on to Resident Evil 8 Village, Capcom's latest attempt to please and scare the crap out of everyone who buys it. Firstly, I want to start by saying that I both loved it and disliked it at the same time. And having only played through it a handful of times so far, my opinion could realistically change over the coming months. So take what I'm saying as my first thoughts of the title, subject to possible change. Village follows on from the 7th game, with the returning characters of Mia and Ethan Winters, having survived the Baker incident, have been given a new life in Europe by our old friend Chris Redfield. Not this imposter from the previous game, whatever the fuck that thing was. No, the real one. Ah, that's better. The game starts with a typical family evening scene and a bedtime story that's presented like something straight out of a Tim Burton feature. Something that seems wildly out of place in a Resident Evil game. But on the flip side, it seems to fit well in the overall gothic presentation of this installment. After Ethan puts his daughter to bed, him and Mia go to sit down to dinner. However, things quickly take a turn for the worse, and Mia is seemingly shot dead right in front of Ethan by Chris and a team of covert-looking soldiers. Seems a bit rude, really. Chris kidnaps both Ethan and his daughter with no explanation of what's going on. When Ethan comes to, he is laying beside an overturned truck on the very edge of the titular village. And so the main game begins. A mission to find his daughter quickly turns into a new nightmare. The majority of this game plays very similar to Resident Evil 7, with elements of 4 and 5 in there for good measure. Movements are pretty much the same, with some improvements made to attack defense. Ethan can now push back on enemies with a well-timed button press, which helps out in some small ways. The weapon mechanics are simply fantastic, and the sounds of brain matter splatter are incredibly satisfying as your enemies' heads disintegrate with a squelchy pop. There's not a tremendous variety of firearms to choose from, but this works in the game's favour as not to overload you with options, leaning towards being able to focus more on upgrading what you have. I actually like that aspect. It means that as you play the game more, you become more familiar with how the weapon handles. There's a couple of melee items, but other than slow slicing and box breaking, they aren't massively effective. There's also a couple of different explosive weapons that can be crafted or purchased, but I rarely use these myself. Weapons and healing, as well as other items, can be stored in your inventory, which sees the return of the attaché case from Resident Evil 4. However, it's not as fluid as the one from 4, as you can't simply swap a weapon's position by placing it on top of another in the almost quick switch fashion that we all got used to. Instead, they need to be placed elsewhere in the case, or on some occasions even outside the case, so space can be made. I know, it's a small moan for sure, but it can get really frustrating. It could just be a bug, but I'm not convinced of that. In any case, it seems from that perspective, the interface isn't quite what it should be in ease of use. The Duke is his name and selling's his game. And buying, and weapons modification, and, well, cooking. This guy likes his food. You can't argue with that. The Duke is this game's merchant system, and much like Resident Evil 4, it's where you can purchase, sell and upgrade. Ammo in this game is purchasable, which is a nice feature that I felt was sadly lacking in other Resident Evil titles. However, don't be fooled too much. The ammo is fucking expensive, not to mention limited in quantity. On the flip side though, it's not the only way to get your hands on precious bullets without picking it up from game areas. You can also craft them in your inventory. The two different ways of crafting and purchasing ammo creates a nice balance and doesn't leave you feeling like you have too much or not enough. Weapons upgrades are also available from the Duke, I didn't really do much upgrading on my first playthrough, but from what I saw of it, it seems to work just fine. You can also now enhance your own status through a new feature that enables you to take ingredients that you collect and hunt throughout the game, and the Duke will create meals that you can eat, increasing your stats much like Seven's injections. Though, in this game, Ethan simply eats it instead. It's a nice touch really. The weapons upgrade system is something that the devs have gotten down to a T and doesn't disappoint in this game, and it pretty much plays out how you would expect it to. The Duke himself is an interesting character that does have an impact on the game's story, certainly more than the Merchant did in Resident Evil 4. There are 4 main bosses in the game. We have Lady Dimitrescu, Donna Beneviento, we have Moreau, and we have Heisenberg. The final boss is Mother Miranda, but for now I'm just going to focus on the 4 lords. Lady Dimitrescu was obviously massively publicised as being a huge part of this game. Don't be fooled. She's hardly in this game at all. She's actually the first lord you encounter and subsequently the first lord you kill. But what I found interesting with Lady Dimitrescu is the fact she has 3 daughters, to which you also have to defeat. And when they're fairly easy to defeat them themselves, you just have to get them near a window, blow the window out, and they'll become somewhat vulnerable to the cold air. And you're able to take care of them with pretty much no effort. The whole castle section was over a little too quickly for my liking. So once you return to the village and go around collecting some items, you're then directed towards House Beneviento. Now this part of the game was absolutely terrifying for me. It embodied every single nightmare that I'd ever had. The majority of the nightmares that I suffered with when I was a child was dolls. I absolutely hated the damn things. Terrified the crap out of me. So as you can imagine, this part of the game really didn't sit well with me. That's exactly what I wanted from this game. Also, as a parent myself, seeing a giant baby monster making what ordinarily would be quite normal sounds for you to hear from a baby. If any of you guys watching are parents, then you'll know that kids stirring in the middle of the night making these apparently cute sounds can actually be genuinely creepy. This part of the game was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed every section of it, no matter how terrified I was. And even once you get out of the basement level, you have to deal with the dolls, and particularly Beneviento's Angie doll. This is a particularly disturbing section of the game. And when I first saw the trailer which had the Angie doll in it, I was a bit sceptical that this didn't really feel much like Resident Evil, but it is explained in a generally satisfying way. The third lord is a lord called Moreau. He is a mutated man who's slowly been turning into a fish. He's actually quite grotesque and disgusting. It was a very short section of the game. The final lord is Heisenberg. Now, Heisenberg is a complete pain in the ass, and so is the area in which he resides. It's known as the factory area. The factory area is pretty much the worst section of the game. It's repetitive, it's dull, and it's slow. It's boring. It really soils all the effort that they made early on in the game. Once you've taken care of Heisenberg, of course, you move on to Mother Miranda. Now, the Mother Miranda section of the game was, again, over way too quickly for my liking, and the game felt very short in general as a result. Now, before you take on Mother Miranda, of course, you have the obligatory Call of Duty style part of the game. I found this very disjointing and very frustrating. Having purchased a survival horror game, it was a very jarring experience going from survival horror to full-blown machine gun action. Now, Chris Redfield's actions in this game are quite inexplicable. The game is full of narrative plot holes and elements of it that would require you to suspend your disbelief a little bit too much. Chris Redfield does not explain to Ethan at any point his actions until you get past the Heisenberg section, and that's close to the end of the game. You spend the game thinking, well, Chris has killed Mia in the very opening of the game, but of course he didn't. Mia wasn't Mia, it was Mother Miranda. Throughout the game, you don't really see much of Chris, even though he's heavily featured in all the marketing material, and he's even on the front cover of the game. So Capcom really did screw the pooch on this. I don't think the marketing for Village was done very well. I don't think the demo was handled particularly well. And the game, well, it's a very okay game. Is it worth paying full price for? yes, I do believe it is worth paying full price for. There's a lot of replayability. There's a lot of things to unlock. A lot of areas that you miss on the first go around. On my first playthrough, I completely missed the mill section with the giant with the hammer. It was an extra little mini boss battle. I completely missed it and sidestepped. So it makes a lot of sense to go back and play this game over and over again. And the replay value is definitely there. But the story is weak. And it shows. So that's pretty much all I've got to say on it. In terms of a game, it's a very good game. In terms of a story, it's quite poor. And in terms of a Resident Evil game, it's not that good. I've definitely seen better Resident Evil titles. That's about all I've got to say on Resident Evil Village. It's a very good game, but ultimately it is flawed. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much and I'll see you in the next video.